On a bitter winter night, a sheriff finds two shivering twins stealing food from a convenience store. When they beg him to be their father, his painful past resurfaces, and he dares to believe he can save them. But the system rips them away, handing them over to someone far more dangerous. How far will he go to defy the law and bring them home? Stay with us for a story of love, sacrifice, and the fight for family. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The winter storm howled outside like a hungry wolf, sending sheets of ice and snow dancing across Mason's Hollow's empty streets. Sheriff James Carter's hands gripped the steering wheel of his patrol car as he carefully navigated the treacherous roads. The headlights barely cut through the darkness, creating ghostly shapes in the swirling snow. Tree branches swayed violently in the wind, their shadows making strange patterns on the snow-covered ground. Just another quiet night, he muttered to himself, his breath visible in the cold car. The heater hummed steadily, fighting against the bitter chill that had settled over the small town. His radio crackled occasionally with routine updates, but nothing worth noting. He adjusted the temperature dial, trying to coax more warmth from the aging system. As he turned onto Main Street, past Thompson's Hardware and the post office, the beam of his headlights caught something unusual. There, in the window of Miller's convenience store, a shadow moved. James slowed the patrol car, squinting through the frost-covered windshield. The store had been closed for hours, its windows dark except for the dim security light near the register. The closed sign swung gently in the wind, tapping against the glass. Probably those Thompson kids again, he sighed, pulling into the empty parking lot. He'd caught them several times before, stealing candy bars and sodas. Times were tough, and some families struggled to put food on the table. The recession had hit their small town particularly hard this year. James grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the biting wind. Ice crunched under his boots as he approached the store's entrance. The lock showed signs of tampering, amateur work, definitely not professionals. Fresh scratches marked the metal around the keyhole and the door hadn't fully closed. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Police, come out where I can see you," he called out, his voice firm but not threatening. The beam caught movement in the snack aisle, and he heard the rustle of packaging. The sound of small feet scuffling against the linoleum floor echoed through the empty store. What he saw next made his heart skip a beat. Two tiny figures huddled together near the crackers display, their small hands stuffed with whatever food they could grab. They couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Their clothes were thin and dirty, their faces smudged with grime. One girl clutched protectively to the other, their identical features marked by fear and exhaustion. Their dark hair was tangled and matted, suggesting days without proper care. James immediately holstered his weapon, his training giving way to pure instinct. He knelt down slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and gentle. The fluorescent beam of his flashlight softened as he pointed it toward the floor. His knee cracked against the cold tile, a sound that made both girls flinch. "Hey there," he said softly, his gruff voice gentling. "You must be freezing." The girls pressed closer together, their eyes wide with fear. The slightly taller one, by maybe half an inch, positioned herself in front of her sister. Her small chin lifted in defiance despite her trembling. Her hands were red and chapped from the cold. James noticed their blue-tinged lips, the way their clothes hung in tatters. His chest tightened at the sight of their tiny shoes, worn through at the toes and completely inadequate for the winter weather. One of the girls had tied her shoelaces together multiple times to keep them from falling apart. "My name is James," he continued, staying at their level. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." He slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out a package of cookies he'd been saving for his late-night patrol. The protective twins' eyes followed his movement, a mix of hunger and suspicion in her gaze. He could hear their stomachs growling in the quiet store. The girls exchanged a quick look, some silent communication passing between them. The quiet one clutched her sister's sleeve, while the braver one kept her eyes fixed on James. Neither spoke, but their shivering had become more pronounced in the store's inadequate heating. Their breath came out in small, visible puffs in the cold air. James felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced in years, not since before his wife left, before their dreams of a family had crumbled. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady. The familiar ache of those memories mixed with a new urgent need to protect these children. "You don't have to run, tell me what's going on." The twins shared another glance, and something in their eyes, a mixture of desperation and hope, struck James to his core. In that moment, he knew this storm-filled night wouldn't be the quiet, uneventful patrol he'd expected. The wind rattled the store's windows, but inside, time seemed to stand still as he waited for their response. The patrol car's heater hummed steadily, fighting against the bitter cold that seeped through the windows. James adjusted the temperature dial, turning it up a notch higher for the two small figures huddled in his back seat. Through the rearview mirror, he watched as the girls pressed close together, their thin frames wrapped in the emergency blankets he kept in his trunk. Their breath fogged the windows in small, irregular patches that quickly faded away. Snow pelted the windshield relentlessly as James steered through the empty streets. His wipers worked overtime, sweeping away the heavy flakes that threatened to obscure his view. The silence in the car felt heavy, broken only by the occasional sniffle from the back seat and the rhythmic squeak of the wipers against the glass. "You two doing okay back there?" James asked softly, trying to keep his voice gentle and reassuring. Neither girl responded, but he caught Lila's quick glance in the mirror before she turned back to the window, her small hand reaching out to trace patterns in the condensation. The minutes ticked by slowly. James's mind raced with procedures and protocols, calling CPS, filing reports, following the proper channels. But something about these girls tugged at his heart in a way he couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way they clung to each other, or how their eyes held a wariness no child should know. Finally, Lila's small voice broke through the quiet. "We can't go back," she whispered, her words barely audible over the car's heater. "He hurt us." Her fingers clutched the blanket tighter, knuckles white against the dark fabric. James felt his grip tighten on the steering wheel. "Who hurt you, sweetheart?" The endearment slipped out naturally, surprising even him. "Our foster daddy," Lila continued, her voice trembling. "He drank the angry juice and got mean. Really mean." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, as if trying to shield herself from the memory. "He hit Lily with his belt when she dropped her milk, so we ran away when he passed out." Her words came faster now, tumbling out like she couldn't hold them back anymore. James swallowed hard, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Where did you go?" "The big church with the broken windows," Lila said. "Nobody goes there anymore. We found blankets in the basement, but it was so cold." Her voice trailed off as Lily pressed closer to her side, seeking comfort in her sister's presence. In the rearview mirror, James could see Lily's fingers twisted in the fabric of her sister's sleeve, her knuckles white from gripping so hard. Her eyes remained fixed on her lap, shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself invisible. A single tear rolled down her cheek, catching the dim light from passing street lamps. "How long were you at the church?" James asked, dreading the answer. His stomach clenched, already knowing it had been too long. "Many days," Lila replied. "We tried to be quiet so nobody would find us, but we got so hungry." She wrapped her arm protectively around her sister, their matching faces reflecting years of learned wariness. James's heart ached as he thought about these two little girls hiding in that drafty old building, scared and hungry, with nobody to turn to. The station came into view through the swirling snow, its lights casting a dim glow through the storm. He pulled into the parking lot, his movement slow and deliberate as he brought the car to a stop, the crunch of snow under the tires seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet night. Before he could speak, Lila lunged forward, her small hands grabbing his uniform through the gap in the partition. "Please don't send us back," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "You can be our daddy, right?" Her voice cracked with desperation, her grip on his sleeve tight enough to leave wrinkles in the fabric. James felt his eyes burn with unshed tears as he looked into Lila's desperate face, seeing both hope and fear in her expression. Behind her, Lily watched with wide, terrified eyes, still clutching her sister's sleeve like a lifeline. The trust and vulnerability in their faces struck him like a physical blow, stirring something deep inside him he thought had died years ago. James slumped in his office chair, the leather creaking beneath his weight. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking each passing second in the quiet station. Through the window of his office, he could see the door to the side room where the twins now slept. His chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a steel band around it and kept pulling it tighter with each breath. He closed his eyes, but the image of their faces remained. Lila's fierce, protective gaze and Lily's quiet, haunted eyes. The way they clung to each other, as if letting go meant losing everything. His hands trembled as he ran them over his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath his palms, a reminder of the long hours he'd spent at the station since finding them. The memories he'd fought so hard to bury came rushing back like a flood breaking through a dam. Sarah's face, twisted with grief, as they left another fertility clinic. The stack of adoption papers they'd started but never finished, yellow with age in the bottom drawer of his desk at home. The day she'd finally packed her bags, saying she couldn't bear the emptiness anymore. 10 years of marriage reduced to cardboard boxes and tear-stained goodbyes, the echo of her footsteps on the porch still haunting him. "I need a family," she'd said, her voice breaking, "a real family." Those words had cut deeper than any knife, carving a hole in his heart that never truly healed. James had thrown himself into his work after that, building walls around his heart brick by brick, reinforcing them with every passing year. He'd convinced himself he was meant to be alone, that being a father wasn't in the cards for him. The badge and uniform became his shield against the world. But now, a sob caught in his throat, surprising him with its intensity. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried. Maybe not since Sarah left. The tears came slowly at first, then in a flood he couldn't control, like a dam finally breaking after years of pressure. His shoulders shook as years of buried grief poured out of him, not just for himself and Sarah, but for those two little girls who'd never known what it meant to feel safe or loved, who'd learned too young to trust only each other. James wiped roughly at his face with his sleeve and stood up, his chair rolling back against the wall. His legs felt unsteady as he walked to the side room, each step weighted with purpose and uncertainty. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet station. The twins lay curled together on the small couch, their breathing deep and even, their small bodies fitting together like puzzle pieces. Someone had given them clean clothes from the station's emergency supplies, and their old, tattered ones lay in a heap by the door, a reminder of everything they'd been through. In sleep, their faces looked peaceful, almost angelic, the worry lines smoothed away by dreams. Lily's thumb had found its way to her mouth while Lila's arm draped protectively over her sister, even in sleep maintaining her role as guardian. James reached for the spare blanket on the shelf and gently draped it over them, tucking it carefully around their shoulders. Lila stirred slightly but didn't wake, mumbling something soft and unintelligible. He knelt beside the couch, his voice barely a whisper in the stillness. "You'll stay here for tonight," he promised softly, the words feeling like a sacred vow. "I won't let anyone hurt you." The words felt right, settled deep in his bones, even though he knew they couldn't last. Tomorrow would bring child protective services, paperwork, and hard questions. The girls would be taken away, fed into a system that had already failed them once, that had forced them to run away into the bitter cold. But for now, in this moment, he could give them safety. He could give them warmth. He could be the shield they so desperately needed. James settled into a chair across from the couch, watching the steady rise and fall of their chests. The station felt unnaturally still, peaceful even, as snow continued to fall outside, coating the world in pristine white. Something stirred in his heart as he looked at them, a feeling he thought he'd never experience again, one he'd buried so deep he'd almost forgotten its name. A longing so deep it made his chest ache, a desire to protect and nurture that he thought had died with his marriage. Maybe, just maybe, he could be the father they needed. Maybe they could heal each other's broken pieces and create something whole and beautiful from the fragments of their past. The first rays of sunlight crept through the station windows, painting golden stripes across James's desk. His neck cracked as he lifted his head, stiff from sleeping in his chair. The events of last night felt almost like a dream, but the sound of movement from the kitchen area brought reality rushing back. The clock on the wall showed 6:45 a.m. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spent the night at the station. He stood slowly, his joints protesting with every movement, and made his way toward the noise. The sight that greeted him made his heart skip a beat. Lila stood on her tiptoes, reaching for a box of cereal on the counter. Her small face was scrunched up in concentration, tongue sticking out slightly as she stretched. Her dark hair was tousled from sleep, making her look even younger than her 5 years. Before James could warn her, the box tipped, sending cornflakes cascading across the linoleum floor like a crunchy waterfall. Lila froze, her eyes going wide with fear. James recognized that look. It was the same one he'd seen in the convenience store, the look of a child expecting punishment, bracing for angry words or worse. "It's okay," he said softly, keeping his voice gentle and his movements slow. "Accidents happen. We'll clean it up together." Lily sat curled up on the worn leather couch, watching the scene with those quiet, observant eyes of hers. She hadn't said a word all morning, but James could feel her gaze following his every move, studying him like a cautious animal might watch a stranger. James grabbed the broom from the corner and started sweeping up the spilled cereal. Lila stood there for a moment, then grabbed a paper towel and began helping him clean. Her tiny hands worked alongside his, careful and determined, and something about the simple act of cleaning together made his chest feel warm and tight. It felt natural, like they'd done this 100 times before. "I can make breakfast," he offered, reaching for a new box of cereal from the higher shelf. "How about some toast, too? Maybe eggs?" Lila nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was the first real smile he'd seen from either of them, and it transformed her whole face, making her eyes sparkle. The morning settled into a strange sort of domesticity. James made toast and scrambled eggs, adding a little cheese the way his mother used to, watching as the girls ate carefully at the small break room table. Lily took tiny bites as if afraid the food might disappear at any moment. Lila kept glancing at her sister, making sure she was eating enough, occasionally pushing her own plate closer to Lily. Reality began creeping in as James watched them, heavy as storm clouds on the horizon. This couldn't last. He had a duty, responsibilities. The system had protocols for situations like this, procedures that couldn't be ignored. His eyes drifted to the black phone on his desk, its presence like a weight on his conscience. Child Protective Services needed to be notified. It was the law. With heavy steps, he walked to his desk and picked up the receiver. His fingers hovered over the numbers, each digit feeling like a betrayal. The morning sun caught the badge on his chest, a reminder of his sworn duties. "You don't want us either?" Lila's voice, small and hurt, stopped him cold. She stood in the doorway, her lower lip trembling slightly, hands clutched together. Those words hit him like a physical blow, making his hand shake on the phone. The defeat in her voice spoke of too many rejections, too many broken promises. James looked at her face, then at Lily, who had appeared silently behind her sister like a shadow. Their eyes held such fear, such resignation to abandonment, that it made his throat tight. His finger remained frozen over the keypad as duty warred with the desperate need to protect these two fragile souls from more pain. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, but the warmth from earlier had vanished, leaving only the cold reality of his choice. James sat at his desk, his calloused hands pressed against his temples. The morning light streaming through the blinds cast long shadows across the scattered paperwork, doing nothing to lift the heavy cloud hanging over him. He'd broken protocol by keeping the twins overnight in his small apartment above the station, and now the weight of that decision bore down on his shoulders like a physical burden. The forms for Child Protective Services lay scattered across his desk, each page a reminder of what he had to do. Coffee rings stained several corners, evidence of his sleepless night spent searching for alternatives. His eyes drifted to where Lily and Lila sat in the corner of his office, sharing a worn coloring book he'd found in an old drawer. Lila was carefully explaining something about the princess they were coloring to her quieter sister. who nodded without looking up from her careful work with the purple crayon. With trembling fingers, James picked up the phone and dialed the number he'd been dreading. Each ring echoed in his ears like a countdown until a sharp, clipped voice answered. "Child Protective Services, this is Mrs. Henderson speaking." James cleared his throat, his mouth suddenly dry. "This is Sheriff James Carter from Mason's Hollow. I need to report 2 minors in need of placement." His voice cracked slightly as he continued, describing how he'd found them, cold, hungry, and alone in the abandoned church on the edge of town. "And you kept them overnight without proper authorization?" Mrs. Henderson's tone grew colder, like winter frost creeping across a window. "Yes, ma'am, I couldn't just—" "Sheriff Carter," she cut him off, the sound of typing in the background. "I have your file right here. You're requesting to foster them yourself?" "Yes, I am." James straightened in his chair, hope flickering briefly like a match in the dark. "That won't be possible." Her words fell like ice. "You're single, working in law enforcement, irregular hours, high-stress environment, and—" There was a rustling of papers. "There are documented incidents of anger management issues in your file from 2018. "Those reports were years ago." James's voice rose, his free hand clenching into a fist. "I've changed. These girls need stability, someone who understands. The system has protocols, Sheriff. We cannot make exceptions based on emotional appeals. A placement team will arrive within the hour." James's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles turned white. "You don't understand. They've been through enough. They need Dash. What they need is to be placed in a proper foster home with an approved family. Good day, Sheriff." The phone slammed down before James could stop himself. The sharp sound echoed through the small office, making both girls jump, and Lily instinctively grabbed her sister's hand, dropping her crayon. James's chest felt tight as he watched them. 2 innocent souls about to be swept back into a system that had already failed them so many times. Lila looked up from their coloring book, her dark eyes wide with concern. "Are you okay, Sheriff James?" He tried to smile, but it felt more like a grimace. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just keep coloring." His voice was gentler now, trying to mask the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. The twins returned to their activity, unaware of the storm brewing around them. James watched them share their crayons, whispering and giggling softly together as they worked on their princess picture. His heart ached knowing what was coming. More foster homes, more uncertainty, more trauma added to their young lives. The station's doorbell rang, its cheerful chime feeling like a death knell. Both girls froze, their faces draining of color as they recognized the sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway. They scrambled up from their spot on the floor, rushing to James with terror in their eyes, the coloring book forgotten on the floor. "Please don't let them take us," Lila cried, clinging to his uniform shirt with tiny, desperate fingers. Lily said nothing, but her silent tears spoke volumes as she pressed herself against his side, trembling like a leaf in the wind. James knelt down, wrapping his arms around them both as they sobbed. "I'll find a way, I promise," he whispered, even as his own heart shattered at the helplessness of his situation. The footsteps grew closer, and he held the girls tighter, wishing he could shield them from what was coming. The storm howled outside James's window, but the noise couldn't drown out the deafening silence inside his house. He sat motionless in his favorite armchair, staring at the blank TV screen, the remote untouched beside him. The darkness of the room matched his mood as memories of the day's events haunted him like persistent ghosts, replaying over and over in his mind. His fingers traced the arm of the chair where Lily had perched just hours ago, her tiny frame fitting perfectly in the worn leather curve. The spot still felt warm somehow, though he knew that was just his imagination. The sound of their crying still echoed in his ears, their desperate pleas as the CPS workers pulled them away, their small hands reaching for him until the very last moment. Unable to sit still any longer, James grabbed his keys and jacket, shrugging it on with trembling hands. He had to know they were safe. The drive to the foster home felt longer than it should have, each mile stretching endlessly before him, every red light an eternity. When he finally pulled up to the address, his heart sank like a stone in his chest. The foster home stood like a dark shadow against the stormy sky, a testament to years of neglect. Paint peeled from the weathered siding in long, curling strips, and dead branches from an overgrown tree scratched against boarded-up windows like skeletal fingers. The front yard was a jungle of knee-high weeds and broken toys, scattered like abandoned dreams. Everything about the place screamed neglect, a visual warning of the misery that waited inside. James parked his patrol car across the street, keeping watch, his trained eyes scanning every detail. Through the grimy front window, movement caught his eye. His breath caught in his throat as Lila's small hand pressed against the glass, leaving a perfect print in the layer of dust. Even from this distance, he could see the fear in her eyes as she stared out into the night, searching the darkness. She looked so lost, so trapped, like a bird in a cage too small for its wings. A harsh voice cut through the air, making James flinch in his seat. On the front porch, Miss Grant towered over a young boy, her finger jabbing the air like a weapon as she berated him. "Get inside, you worthless little brat." The boy scurried past her, head down, shoulders hunched against the verbal assault. James's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white with tension. The steering wheel creaked under his grip as he watched Miss Grant storm back inside, slamming the door so hard it rattled in its frame like a gunshot in the quiet night. Through the window, he saw Lila jump at the sound and disappear from view, melting into the shadows like a frightened ghost. His stomach churned with a mixture of rage and helplessness, bitter bile rising in his throat. Everything about this place confirmed his worst fears, every detail a red flag he couldn't ignore. The twins had escaped one abusive situation only to land in another, traded one nightmare for the next. The system he'd trusted to protect them had failed them again, like it had failed so many others. "I'm getting them out," he muttered under his breath, his jaw set with determination. The words felt like a vow, heavy with purpose and promise. He wouldn't let them suffer here. Not when they'd already endured so much. Not when they'd trusted him to keep them safe. The morning light filtered weakly through the gray clouds as James pushed open the heavy glass doors of the county social services office. His boots squeaked against the freshly mopped linoleum floor, echoing through the sterile hallway. The familiar smell of industrial cleaner and stale coffee hung in the air. At the end of the corridor sat Mrs. Henderson, the department head, a stern woman with wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose and perfectly pressed clothes that matched her rigid demeanor. She barely glanced up from her computer screen as James approached her desk. "Can I help you?" Her voice was as cold as the winter air outside, each word precisely measured. James planted his hands firmly on her desk, his calloused fingers spread wide against the polished wood. "I need to discuss the Mason twins' placement." Mrs. Henderson's fingers continued clicking away at her keyboard, the sound like tiny hammers against James's nerves. "That case has been processed and closed, Sheriff Carter." "Have you seen that foster home?" James's voice rose slightly, his throat tight with frustration. "The windows are boarded up. The place looks like it should be condemned." Finally, Mrs. Henderson looked up, her face a mask of bureaucratic indifference, lips pressed into a thin line. "We followed all required procedures. The home meets state minimum requirements." "Minimum requirements?" James scoffed, his hands clenching into fists. "I saw that woman screaming at another child on the porch. Those girls are terrified. They're huddling together like scared rabbits." "Sheriff Carter," she said, folding her hands on her desk with exaggerated patience. "The law requires us to act swiftly in placing children. We cannot hold them indefinitely while searching for perfect situations." "Perfect?" James's face reddened, a vein pulsing at his temple. "I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for safe. Do you even care about these children's well-being, or is it all about checking boxes on your forms?" "I suggest you leave before you say something you'll regret," Mrs. Henderson replied icily, her fingers drumming once on her desk. "We've followed all protocols. The case is closed." A young man in a crisp charcoal suit who had been sitting nearby stood up and approached them. His tie was loosened, just enough to suggest he'd been working long hours. "Excuse me," he said, extending his hand to James. "I'm Gabriel Reyes. I couldn't help overhearing." James shook his hand, noting the intelligent gleam in the lawyer's eyes and the compassionate set of his jaw. Gabriel lowered his voice, leaning in closer. Listen, I deal with these cases all the time. The system. He glanced around before continuing, his words barely above a whisper. It's rigged. They're not going to help you. The system isn't designed to let men like you win. James's jaw clenched. He'd spent his whole career upholding the law, believing in justice. But now, seeing how the system had failed these innocent girls, something snapped inside him. The weight of 20 years of faith in the system crumbled in an instant. Then I'll burn the damn system down, he growled, loud enough for Mrs. Henderson to hear, each word carrying the weight of a promise. He turned on his heel and strode toward the exit, his footsteps echoing through the quiet office like thunderclaps. The morning light seemed a shade darker as he pushed through the doors, his mind set on one goal: getting those girls back and taking down the corrupt system that had failed them. His resolve was stronger than ever, hardened like steel in a forge, and he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, no matter the cost. James hunched over his coffee cup in the corner booth of Pete's Diner, watching steam rise in lazy spirals. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting shadows across the worn Formica table where Gabriel Reyes sat opposite him, spreading out a handful of legal documents. The late-night crowd had thinned to just a few truckers at the counter, their quiet conversations mixing with the soft clink of silverware. I'll be straight with you, Sheriff, Gabriel said, his voice low and serious. You don't have a case. Not even close. He tapped his finger on one of the papers, his wedding ring catching the dim light. The system is designed to protect itself, not the children. CPS will crush you before you even get started. James felt his jaw tighten, the muscle twitching beneath his skin. There has to be something we can do. Gabriel shook his head. His tie loosened after a long day at the courthouse. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. Look, they've already flagged you as unfit. Single man in his 40s, demanding job with irregular hours, and... He paused, scanning another document, his frown deepening. Past anger management issues? That's not going to play well. That was years ago, James protested, his voice rising slightly. A few heads turned their way, and he forced himself to lower his voice, leaning closer across the table. You should see where they put those girls. The house is falling apart. The foster mother, Miss Grant, I've dealt with her before. She's cruel, Gabriel. Those girls are terrified. James ran his hands through his graying hair, his fingers trembling slightly with frustration. You didn't see their faces when I found them in that store. They were starving, cold, and Lila ... His voice cracked slightly, the memory hitting him like a physical blow. She asked me to be their daddy. They trusted me, and I let them down. The waitress stopped by to refill their cups, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. Gabriel waited until she left before leaning forward, his expression softening. Listen, James, I've seen hundreds of cases like this. The system doesn't care about individual stories. They care about procedures, paperwork, and protecting themselves from liability. James stared into his fresh coffee, watching his distorted reflection in the dark liquid. So that's it? We just let them suffer? Gabriel was quiet for a moment, studying James's face. Something in the sheriff's determination seemed to affect him. He sighed, loosening his tie further and rubbing his temple. Look, I'll dig into it. Maybe we can find something on Miss Grant, build a case that way. He pulled out a legal pad, his pen hovering over the yellow paper. But I'm warning you, this won't be clean. If we want to help these girls, we might have to bend some rules, maybe break a few. James nodded slowly, a grim resolve settling over his features. Whatever it takes. You understand what you're risking? Gabriel pressed, his dark eyes serious. Your career, your reputation, everything you've built could come crashing down. I don't care, James said firmly, his hands wrapping tightly around the warm coffee cup. Those girls need someone to fight for them. If not me, then who? Gabriel gathered his papers, shaking his head slightly. The leather briefcase creaked as he stuffed the documents inside. I'll start looking into Miss Grant's background tomorrow. But James? He paused, briefcase in hand, his expression grave. Be careful. The system has teeth, and it bites hard. James watched as Gabriel walked out of the diner, the bell above the door chiming softly in the quiet night. He felt a small spark of hope, but it was tempered by the weight of what lay ahead. The coffee had grown cold in his cup, but he barely noticed. His mind was already racing, planning his next move, knowing that somewhere across town, 2 little girls were counting on him, whether they knew it or not. James drummed his fingers against the steering wheel, his patrol car idling quietly in the shadow of an old oak tree. The foster home loomed ahead like a haunted house from a nightmare. Weathered siding, sagging gutters, and windows that seemed to stare back at him with hollow darkness. The storm clouds from last night still hung low, casting everything in shades of gray. A cold wind rustled through dead leaves, sending them skittering across the unkempt lawn. His watch showed 2:15 p.m. The twins had been here less than 24 hours, but every minute felt like an eternity. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, broken only by the occasional distant rumble of thunder. He'd barely slept last night, tossing and turning as his mind replayed the moment they'd been taken away. Taking a deep breath, James stepped out of his car and walked purposefully toward the house. Each step on the cracked concrete path revealed more signs of neglect. Empty beer bottles hidden in overgrown weeds, a rusty tricycle abandoned on its side, garbage spilling from torn bags near the steps. The smell of rot and decay hung in the air. The porch creaked ominously under his weight, and a broken swing swayed in the breeze, its chains squealing like a trapped animal. Paint chips crunched beneath his boots. He knocked firmly on the door, his badge gleaming dully in what little light filtered through the clouds. After several long moments, he heard shuffling inside, followed by harsh whispers and the sound of something being knocked over. The door opened with a protesting groan, revealing Miss Grant. Her thin lips were pressed into a tight line, and her gray hair was pulled back so severely it seemed to stretch her skin. Dark circles under her eyes made her look almost ghoulish. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice as unwelcoming as the house itself. Her sweater hung loose on her frame, spotted with what looked like old food stains. The sour smell of unwashed clothes wafted from behind her. "Good afternoon, ma'am," James said, keeping his tone professional despite the unease churning in his stomach. "I'm here to check on the twins, Lily and Lila. I'd like to see them, please." His hand instinctively rested on his belt, close to his badge. Miss Grant's eyes narrowed, darting briefly to something behind her before focusing back on him. "That's not necessary. They're fine. CPS placed them here properly, and we don't need any outside interference causing confusion." She started to close the door, but James caught movement behind her. Through a grimy window to the left of the door, he saw Lila, her small hand pressed against the glass, leaving a clear print in the dirt. Her eyes were wide with fear, silently begging for help. The sight made his heart clench. He could just make out Lily's shadow behind her, clinging to her sister's shirt. "Ma'am, as law enforcement, I have concerns about—" "I said they're fine," Miss Grant snapped, her voice rising sharply. Her fingers gripped the doorframe until her knuckles turned white. "You have no right to come here questioning my care. I've been doing this for 20 years. Now, unless you have a warrant, get off my property." James stood his ground, though he knew she was technically right. Through the crack in the door, he caught glimpses of the interior, peeling wallpaper, stacks of newspapers, a musty smell that spoke of neglect. A cockroach scuttled across the floor inside. Something was very wrong here, but without proper cause or documentation, his hands were tied. "I'll be watching," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of warning. Thunder rolled overhead, emphasizing his words. Miss Grant's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "Get out," she hissed, slamming the door in his face with enough force to shake loose more paint chips. James walked back to his car, each step heavy with frustration. His fists clenched at his sides as Lila's frightened face burned in his memory. The wind had picked up, carrying the promise of another storm. "I'm getting them out," he muttered to himself, his resolve hardening like steel. Whatever it takes. James leaned forward in his chair, his eyes scanning the documents spread across Gabriel's cluttered desk. The small office felt even smaller with papers everywhere. On the desk, the floor, and spilling out of the filing cabinet. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the dusty blinds, highlighting the disturbing truth they'd uncovered. The air felt thick with tension, heavy with the weight of secrets finally coming to light. "Look at this," Gabriel said, pushing a worn folder toward James. "Miss Grant's fostering history goes back 10 years. 23 children have passed through her care." He pulled out another document, his face grim. But here's where it gets concerning. 17 of those kids were moved within 3 months. No explanations, no follow-ups. His fingers trembled slightly as he pointed to the dates, each one representing another child lost in the system. James picked up one of the files, his jaw tightening. 3 months? That's barely enough time to settle in. The muscle in his cheek twitched as he fought to control his rising anger. Exactly. Gabriel shuffled through more papers, the rustle of documents filling the uncomfortable silence. "And these 4 cases here, the paperwork just stops. The kids' names vanish from the system. No transfer records, no adoption papers, nothing." He spread the files out, creating a devastating timeline of disappearances. James felt his stomach turn. He thought of Lily and Lila's frightened faces pressed against that grimy window. Their eyes had held the same fear he now saw documented in file after file. How has nobody caught this? "The system protects its own," Gabriel said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "CPS is overwhelmed, understaffed. Miss Grant knows how to work the system, file the right papers, say the right things." His voice carried the weariness of someone who'd seen too much corruption go unchallenged. "But these discrepancies..." James gestured at the scattered files, his police badge catching the afternoon light. "This has to be enough to get someone's attention." Gabriel shook his head, his shoulders slumping. "We need more concrete evidence. Right now it's all circumstantial. They'll say the missing paperwork is clerical error, that quick transfers are normal in the foster system." He straightened a stack of papers, his movements betraying his frustration. James stood up, pacing the small office. His police instincts were screaming that something was deeply wrong. The floorboards creaked beneath his heavy steps as he moved. "Those girls aren't safe there. We can't just sit on this information while we gather more evidence." "I understand," Gabriel said, his voice softening. "But if we move too quickly without solid proof, we'll lose any chance of helping them or exposing what's really happening in that house." He watched James with concern, recognizing the look of a man ready to fight. James picked up another file, his hands shaking with anger. The photo showed a young boy, maybe 7 or 8, his eyes vacant and scared. The file ended abruptly after 2 months at Miss Grant's home. The boy's face seemed to stare right through him, demanding justice. "This isn't just about Lily and Lila anymore," James said, his voice rough with emotion. "This woman has been hurting kids for years, and the system just looks the other way." His fingers tightened on the file until his knuckles turned white. Gabriel nodded solemnly, the late afternoon shadows deepening the worry lines on his face. "It's bigger than we thought, but taking on the foster care system, it won't be easy. They'll fight back hard." James stared at the file in his hands, the weight of what they'd discovered pressing down on him. With a sharp movement, he slammed it shut. "I'll expose this system if it's the last thing I do," he muttered, the weight of his decision sinking in. The sound echoed through the cramped office like a promise. James sits in his patrol car, his heart pounding against his ribs as he watches Miss Grant's house through the frosted windows. The night is pitch black, with only a few scattered streetlights casting weak yellow pools on the snow-covered ground. His breath creates small clouds in the cold air as he waits, every muscle tense with anticipation. The weight of what he's about to do presses heavily on his shoulders, but the memory of the twins' frightened faces strengthens his resolve. He checks his watch again, 8:45 p.m. Miss Grant's routine has been predictable these past few days. She always leaves for her evening errands around this time, probably to get more cheap wine from the corner store. His palms are sweaty despite the cold as he grips the steering wheel, watching and waiting. The minutes tick by with agonizing slowness. Right on schedule, the porch light flickers on, and Miss Grant emerges from the house. She's wrapped in a thick coat, fumbling with her keys as she makes her way to her old sedan. The porch steps creak under her weight as she descends. James ducks lower in his seat as she drives past, her headlights briefly illuminating his car before she disappears around the corner, leaving behind the lingering smell of exhaust in the cold air. With his heart in his throat, James exits his vehicle and approaches the house. The snow crunches beneath his boots as he moves carefully through the darkness, staying close to the shadows. A small movement catches his eye. Lila's face appears in the window, her tiny hands pressed against the glass, leaving smudged prints on the dirty surface. Their eyes meet, and James feels his chest constrict at the fear and hope mingled in her expression. She disappears quickly like a frightened rabbit. Using the key he had quietly made a copy of during his official visit, James unlocks the front door. It creaks slightly as he pushes it open, and he freezes, listening for any sound. The house is silent except for the hum of an old heater and the occasional drip of a leaky faucet somewhere in the darkness. The interior is worse than he remembered. The smell of neglect and spoiled food hits him immediately, making his stomach turn. Empty takeout containers litter the coffee table, and dirty clothes are strewn across the floor like abandoned flags. The wallpaper peels in long strips, revealing water-stained walls beneath. Cockroaches scatter as his shadow falls across the room. James moves through the house like a shadow, his police training kicking in as he checks each room. His hand instinctively rests on his hip where his service weapon usually sits, though he'd left it at home tonight. He finds the twins in what passes for their bedroom, really just a small space with two thin mattresses on the floor. Old blankets and torn clothes are scattered around them, and a single bare bulb casts harsh shadows on the walls. The room smells of mildew and fear. The girls look up at him with wide eyes, Lily clutching her sister's hand so tightly her knuckles are white. They're wearing the same clothes from days ago, now even more wrinkled and dirty. A dark stain marks the front of Lily's shirt. Lila's face shows recognition and relief, while Lily remains characteristically quiet, though her grip on her sister's hand loosens slightly. Her eyes dart between James and the door, like a trapped animal looking for escape routes. "We need to go now," James whispers, kneeling down to their level, careful to make his large frame less intimidating. "I'm taking you home with me. You'll be safe there." His voice catches slightly on the word home, remembering how long his own house has felt empty. The twins exchange a quick glance, their silent communication that James has come to recognize, a language born of shared trauma and survival. Lila nods first, then Lily follows suit, like a shadow copying its owner. They move quietly, like little ghosts used to sneaking around, gathering what few possessions they have into a small, tattered backpack. James notices there isn't much to pack. A few worn clothes, a dirty stuffed animal missing an eye, and a dog-eared picture book. James leads them through the house, holding their small hands in his. Lila's fingers grip his tightly, warm and trusting, while Lily's touch is lighter, still uncertain, ready to pull away at the first sign of danger. The adrenaline courses through his veins as they make their way to the front door, each creak of the floorboard sounding like thunder in the quiet house. His police instincts have him constantly scanning for threats, though he knows the real danger won't return for at least another hour. At the doorway, James pauses, checking outside for any signs of Miss Grant's return. The street remains empty, the snow still falling softly in the glow of the streetlights, creating a deceptively peaceful scene. He squeezes the girl's hands gently and whispers, "You're going to be okay. I'll keep you safe." The words feel like a sacred vow in the darkness, and he knows with absolute certainty that he'll die before breaking it. The morning fog clings to the winding road as James drives his patrol car toward the state penitentiary. His knuckles are white against the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight it aches. The decision to visit his father wasn't easy. It had taken 3 sleepless nights of tossing and turning before he'd finally made the call, each hour filled with memories he'd rather forget. The prison looms ahead, a gray concrete monster rising from the mist like something from a nightmare. James parks in the visitor lot, sitting for a long moment to steady his nerves, watching his breath fog up the windshield. The last time he'd seen his father was at the sentencing 5 years ago. The memory of that day still burns like acid. William Carter, the respected judge, being led away in handcuffs after his corruption was exposed, his legacy destroyed in a single afternoon. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzz overhead like angry wasps as James follows a stern-faced guard through multiple security checkpoints. Each heavy metal door that clangs shut behind him makes his heart beat faster, the sound echoing through his bones. The visiting room is small and cold, with bare concrete walls and a single metal table bolted to the floor, everything designed to remind visitors they're in a cage. When they bring William in, James barely recognizes him. Prison has aged his father harshly. His once black hair now completely gray, his proud posture slightly stooped, deep lines carved into his face. But those eyes haven't changed. Still sharp, still calculating, still full of judgment, like he's sitting on his bench passing sentence. Well, William says, his voice rough like sandpaper. The prodigal son returns. James sits across from him, forcing himself to meet that cold stare, fighting the urge to look away like he did as a child. "I need your help." William's laugh is harsh, echoing off the concrete walls. "Of course you do. Why else would you be here? Not to check on your old man's health." James explains about the twins, about the broken system, about his desperate need to save them. His words come out in a rush, like water breaking through a dam. With each word, William's expression grows more contemptuous, his lip curling in familiar disapproval. "A black cop trying to adopt 2 black girls?" William scoffs, shaking his head like he's watching a particularly dim student. "The system will eat you alive, boy. They don't belong to you." "They don't belong to anyone," James snaps back, his voice rising with sudden heat. "That's the problem. They're just numbers in a broken system, being bounced from one abusive home to another like unwanted packages." Something flickers in William's eyes, perhaps recognition, perhaps just calculation, gone too quick to read. He leans forward, chains rattling against the metal table. "There might be someone who can help. Saul Davenport. He knows how to navigate the system, make things happen." "And what's the catch?" James asks, already knowing there's always a price with his father. William's thin lips curve into a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "You'll owe me a favor, something to be collected later. That's how these things work, son. You should know that by now." James feels sick to his stomach, bile rising in his throat, but he knows he has no choice. For the twins, he'll deal with the devil himself. "Fine," he says quietly, the word tasting like ash. "I'll do it." "Remember this moment, son," William says, leaning back with satisfaction, like a spider watching prey stumble into its web. "Remember who you came crawling back to." James stands, unable to bear another minute in his father's presence, the air suddenly too thick to breathe. As he turns to leave, William calls after him, "They'll never let you win, you know." "Not really. Some things never change." The metal door slams behind James with finality, leaving him alone in the sterile hallway. His father's words echo in his head like poison, mixing with disgust at the bargain he's just struck. But he pushes it all down deep inside where he keeps his other regrets, focusing on the next step, finding Saul Davenport and whatever fresh hell that might bring. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as James walked through the prison corridors, each step echoing against the concrete floor. Steel doors clanged shut behind him, the sound making him flinch. The guard leading him remained silent, his keys jingling with each step, a rhythmic reminder of where he was. The antiseptic smell burned his nostrils, mixing with the underlying scent of despair that seemed to seep from the very walls. James wiped his sweaty palms against his uniform pants, his heart pounding harder with each step. The last time he'd seen his father was at the sentencing 5 years ago. The memory of that day still burned, his father's stoic face as the gavel came down, refusing to even look at his son. The shame and anger from that day felt as fresh as ever. The visitation room was small and stark, with just a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs. William Carter sat there, his prison jumpsuit a stark contrast to the fancy suits he once wore on the bench. His father had aged, gray hair now dominant where black used to be, deep lines etched around his mouth like canyons of bitterness. But those eyes, they were the same, cold, judging, calculating. They seemed to strip away James's badge, his uniform, everything he'd built for himself. "Well, well," William said, his voice rough like sandpaper. "The prodigal son returns." James sat down, keeping his expression neutral despite the tremor in his hands. "I need your help." William's laugh was harsh, echoing off the bare walls. "Of course you do. Why else would you be here? Certainly not to check on your old man." James explained about the twins, about the broken system, about Miss Grant. With each word, his father's expression grew more mocking, his lip curling in that familiar way that had always made James feel small and worthless. "A black cop trying to adopt 2 black girls?" William scoffed, shaking his head, his chains rattling with the movement. "The system doesn't work that way, son. You know better. Always trying to be the hero, aren't you?" "The system is broken," James shot back, heat rising in his voice, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. "These girls need help. You of all people should understand that." "They don't belong to you," William said coldly, leaning back in his chair. "The foster system exists for a reason. Stop trying to play savior. To abuse children? To let them suffer?" James leaned forward, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "You were a judge. You saw how it failed them. Every single day in your courtroom, you saw it." Something flickered in William's eyes. Maybe recognition, maybe just calculation. He was silent for a long moment, studying his son with the same intense scrutiny he'd once used from the bench. "There might be someone who can help," William finally said, his voice dropping lower. "Saul Davenport. He knows how to navigate the system, make things happen when they need to." James felt a surge of hope quickly tempered by suspicion. His father never gave anything without a price. "What's the catch?" William's smile was thin, predatory. "Smart boy, you'll owe me a favor. No questions asked when I call it in. That's the price of doing business." James's stomach churned, acid rising in his throat. Owing his father anything felt dangerous, like putting his head in a lion's mouth. But he thought of Lily and Lila's frightened faces, of Miss Grant's cold eyes, of the bruises he couldn't prove. "Deal," he said quietly, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. William wrote down a number on a scrap of paper with precise, measured strokes. "Tell him I sent you. And James?" His eyes locked onto his son's, holding him in place. "Don't disappoint me again." James stood, taking the paper, the thin sheet feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The weight of what he'd just agreed to settled heavy on his shoulders as he walked toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He didn't look back at his father. He couldn't. The sound of his father's chains rattling behind him followed him all the way down the corridor. James sat across from Saul Davenport, feeling small despite his badge and uniform. The lawyer's office was all glass and chrome, with a view of the city that spoke of power and influence. The air conditioning hummed steadily, making the room feel even colder than it was. Expensive artwork adorned the walls, each piece probably worth more than James made in a year. Saul picked up the piece of paper with his name on it, written in William Carter's precise handwriting. His eyebrows lifted slightly as he recognized the former judge's signature. A ghost of a smile played across his thin lips. "So you're William's son," he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Never thought I'd see the day. Your father was quite the force to be reckoned with in his time." James shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair, the material creaking beneath him. "Look, I need your help. These girls—" "Tell me about them," Saul interrupted, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers beneath his chin. James took a deep breath and began explaining everything, finding the twins in the convenience store, their desperate situation, the abuse they'd suffered, and the current foster home that was clearly unsafe. His voice grew thick with emotion as he described their fear, their plea for help. He told Saul about the bruises he'd seen, the way they flinched at sudden movements, how they clung to each other like lifelines. Saul's expression remained unchanged as he flipped through the hastily assembled file James had brought, his manicured fingers moving methodically through the pages. "You do understand that what you're asking is nearly impossible." He looked up, his gray eyes cold and calculating behind designer frames. The system isn't designed for men like you to win. Single, older, law enforcement. These are all marks against you, not to mention the racial dynamics at play. The odds are stacked so high they're practically in orbit. I don't care about the odds, James insisted, leaning forward, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. These girls need me. They've been through hell and the system keeps failing them. I can't just stand by and watch it happen. The system, Saul said with a dry laugh, works exactly as it's designed to work. It's not meant to be fair. He stood up and walked to his window, hands clasped behind his back, gazing out at the city sprawled below. To win this, we'll need to play dirty. Very dirty. Are you prepared for that, Sheriff? James felt his throat tighten. Everything in his training, in his years of upholding the law, rebelled against the idea. But then he remembered Lila's tiny hand pressed against the window, Lily's silent tears, the way they both looked at him with such desperate hope. What exactly are you suggesting? We'll need to discredit the current foster mother, dig up dirt, create pressure points, maybe even manufacture some evidence if necessary. Saul turned back to face James, his expression hard and uncompromising. And you'll need to be prepared for them to dig into your past. Every mistake, every angry outburst, every parking ticket, they'll use it all against you. They'll turn your life inside out looking for reasons to deny you. James clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. I don't care what they do to me. I just want those girls safe, whatever it takes. Then we have a deal, Saul said, extending his hand across the polished desk. But remember, Sheriff Carter, you'll owe me a favor. And when I come to collect, I expect full cooperation. No questions asked. James stood and shook Saul's hand, feeling like he was making a deal with the devil. But he had no choice. For Lily and Lila, he would do whatever it took, even if it meant compromising everything he'd once believed in. As he turned to leave, Saul called out, "One more thing, Sheriff. From this moment on, everything changes. Your life will never be the same. Are you absolutely sure you're ready for that?" James paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "Yes," he said firmly, though his stomach churned with anxiety. He walked out of the office, leaving behind the last traces of his simple, orderly life. The weight of what he'd just agreed to pressed down on him like a physical thing, but he couldn't turn back now. The twins were counting on him, and he'd rather die than let them down. James walked back to his patrol car, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. The morning sun felt harsh against his tired eyes as he slumped against the driver's door. 3 days. That's all he had left before the twins would be gone forever, shipped off to some wealthy couple who probably saw them as nothing more than accessories to their perfect life. His phone buzzed, Saul Davenport's number flashing on the screen. James answered it with trembling hands. "They're moving fast," Saul's cold voice crackled through the speaker. "The adoption is being expedited. These people have connections, James. They've got money, influence, and a perfect record on paper." James closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. "How long?" 3 days, maybe less." Saul paused, papers rustling in the background. "The couple's already filed all the necessary paperwork. They're planning to take the girls out of state as soon as it's finalized. There has to be something we can do," James said, his voice breaking slightly. "Those girls need me. You should see how scared they are, Saul. The system's failing them." "Listen carefully." Saul's tone turned serious. "The only shot we have is to appeal to the judge's emotions, make them see beyond the paperwork, show them what these girls mean to you. But James," he hesitated, "playing by the rules might not be enough this time." James gripped the phone tighter. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying that sometimes justice needs a little push. The clock's ticking, Sheriff. You need to decide how far you're willing to go." The call ended, leaving James alone with his thoughts. He looked up at the sky, watching clouds drift by, feeling the weight of his badge against his chest. 3 days to save 2 little girls from disappearing into a system that had already hurt them so much. His hands clenched into fists as he remembered Lila's desperate plea. You can be our daddy, right? And Lily's silent tears, her tiny hand clutching his uniform. They trusted him, and he couldn't let them down. Standing there beside his patrol car, James felt the full weight of what lay ahead. This wasn't just about following the law anymore. It was about doing what was right. The rules of the system had failed these girls time and time again. Maybe it was time to play by different rules. He pulled out his keys, the metal cold against his palm. 3 days wasn't much time, but he would make every second count. The twins needed him, and he wasn't about to let them down. Not now, not ever. Looking up at the vast sky one last time, James took a deep breath. The hardest battle of his life lay ahead, and he knew there would be no going back from whatever choice he made next. The shrill ring of James's phone pierced through the quiet darkness of his house. He fumbled for it on his nightstand, his heart racing when he saw Gabriel's name on the screen. "James, we've got trouble!" Gabriel's voice was tight with urgency. James sat up straight in bed, instantly alert. "What's happening?" "I just got word from my contact at CPS, Miss Grant." Gabriel paused, and James could hear papers rustling in the background. "She sold the adoption rights to the twins." "What do you mean sold?" James's voice came out as a growl. "It's a backdoor deal, some wealthy couple from out of state. They've got connections, pulled strings to fast-track everything." Gabriel's words tumbled out quickly. "They're taking the girls in the morning." James felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. The room seemed to spin around him as anger surged through his body. His free hand clenched into a fist, knuckles turning white. "That's illegal," he managed to say through gritted teeth. "She can't just sell children." "On paper, it looks legitimate. The couple made a generous donation to Miss Grant's foster care program, but we both know what really happened." Gabriel sounded defeated. "James, they're leaving at dawn, taking the first flight out." James was already moving, pulling on his boots with one hand. "I'm getting them back." "Think about what you're doing," Gabriel warned. "Without legal custody, anything you do now is kidnapping. You'll lose your badge, maybe even face jail time." "I don't care." James grabbed his gun belt from the hook by his bed. "Those girls aren't some commodity to be bought and sold." "James." "No," James cut him off. "I've played by the rules. I've watched that woman abuse the system, hurt those kids. Not anymore." He could hear Gabriel sighing on the other end. "Just be careful. Once you cross this line, there's no going back." James clipped his badge to his belt, checked his gun, and grabbed his keys from the kitchen counter. His hands were shaking, but not from fear, from determination. "This isn't over," he muttered as he walked toward his front door, ready to face whatever consequences lay ahead. The night pressed in around James's patrol car as he pushed through the storm, his headlights barely cutting through the thick darkness. Rain pelted the windshield while his wipers worked overtime, fighting to maintain visibility. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, every muscle in his body tense with determination. Beside him, Lila sat rigid in her seat, her small hands gripping the seatbelt so tight her knuckles matched his. Her eyes were wide with fear, fixed on the road ahead. "They took her." Lila's voice quivered, barely above a whisper. "They took my sister." James glanced at her, his heart aching at the terror in her voice. "I know, sweetheart. We're going to get her back." His words were firm, but inside, his stomach churned with anxiety. The thought of Lily being shipped off to strangers made his blood boil. He pressed the accelerator harder, the engine roaring in response. The patrol car's tires fought for grip on the slick road as they raced through the night. According to Gabriel's intel, the vehicle carrying Lily was only a few miles ahead, heading for the state line. "Dispatch, this is Carter. I need immediate backup on Route 16 heading north." Static crackled through his radio, but no response came. He tried again. "Anyone copy?" "This is Carter, requesting urgent assistance." Nothing but silence answered him. Lila's whispers continued, a heartbreaking mantra. "They took her. They took my sister." James pushed the car faster despite the dangerous conditions. The speedometer crept up as they rounded a bend in the road, and there it was. A black SUV with tinted windows, its taillights glowing red through the rain. His jaw clenched as he focused on the vehicle ahead. That SUV held Lily, and he wasn't about to let them take her away from her sister. Not after everything these girls had been through. Not after they'd finally found someone who truly cared about them. "Hold on tight, Lila," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. The patrol car gained ground on the SUV, closing the distance yard by yard. James's eyes narrowed as he fixed his gaze on the vehicle ahead. Through gritted teeth, he muttered, "Hold on, Lily. I'm coming." The night howled with fury as James's patrol car gained ground on the black SUV, his siren piercing through the darkness. Rain lashed against the windshield in angry sheets, but James remained focused, his eyes locked on the vehicle ahead. Beside him, Lila gripped her seatbelt until her knuckles turned white, her small body trembling with each bump in the road. "Hold on tight," James commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. The SUV's taillights glowed red through the rain, growing larger as they closed the distance. Instead of slowing down at the sound of his siren, the vehicle accelerated, tires splashing through puddles. James pulled up alongside the SUV, holding his badge against the window. Through the tinted glass, he caught sight of Lily in the back seat. Her face was streaked with tears as she pounded desperately against the window, her silent cries tearing at his heart. The adoptive mother's face drained of color when she recognized him, and she pressed harder on the gas pedal. "They're not stopping," Lila whispered, fear evident in her voice. James gripped the wheel tighter and made a split-second decision. He swerved his patrol car sharply in front of the SUV, forcing it toward the shoulder of the road. Tires screeched against wet pavement as the SUV skidded, finally coming to a halt in the mud. Without hesitation, James threw his car into park and jumped out, drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. Rain soaked through his uniform as he approached the SUV, his gun steady in his hands. The adoptive parents emerged slowly from their vehicle, hands raised in protest. "This is illegal," the adoptive father shouted over the storm. "We have papers." "You can't do this," the mother added, her voice shrill with panic. James ignored their protests, his attention fixed on Lily's tear-stained face pressed against the back window. Her tiny hands reached for him, desperate for rescue. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the scene in stark white as James took his stance. "Get out of the car," he commanded, his voice carrying over the howling wind. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the chance to make things right. The wind howled across the empty road as James approached the black SUV, his hand steady on his service weapon. Rain pelted his face, but he barely noticed it, his eyes locked with the adoptive father's, who stood defiantly by the driver's door. The challenge between them was silent but unmistakable. "You have no right to do this," the adoptive mother called out, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. "We have legal papers. This is kidnapping." James kept moving forward, their protests washing over him like the rain. His focus remained sharp, unwavering. The adoptive father raised his hands in surrender, but his face wore a smirk that made James's blood boil. "The law is on our side, Sheriff," the man said, his tone mocking. "Those papers make them ours." The adoptive mother stepped between them, her face hard and determined. "We paid good money for this adoption. You can't just—" "That adoption was fraudulent," James cut her off, his voice carrying over the storm. "Miss Grant sold those girls illegally. They don't belong to you." "We have rights," the adoptive father shouted back. "You're just a cop who got too attached. These girls are ours now." Through the heated exchange, a small voice pierced the tension. Lily's face pressed against the window, her tiny hands splayed on the glass. "Daddy?" The word hit James like a physical blow. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, the storm seemed to fade away. That single word carried more weight than any legal document ever could. James lowered his weapon slightly, turning to face the adoptive mother. His voice grew softer, but no less determined. "Those girls have been through enough. Let them go." "You can't do this," she repeated, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "I'm not leaving without them," James said firmly, reaching for the back door handle. "You don't have a say anymore." The rain pounded against the asphalt as James stood his ground, his service weapon trained on the adoptive father. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the rage in the man's eyes. Without warning, the father lunged forward, his hands reaching for James's throat. James reacted instantly, years of police training kicking in. He sidestepped the attack and grabbed the man's arm, using the father's own momentum against him. In one fluid motion, James slammed him face down onto the hood of the SUV. The impact echoed through the night, followed by a grunt of pain. "Stay down," James ordered, his voice hard as steel. A scream pierced the air. The adoptive mother had yanked open the back door and was trying to drag Lily out by her arm. The little girl's face contorted in pain as she struggled against the woman's grip. "Let her go." James moved swiftly, his hand wrapping around the woman's wrist. With careful but firm pressure, he forced her to release her hold on Lily. The girl immediately scrambled toward him, wrapping her arms around his legs. "Please don't let them take me again," Lily sobbed, her whole body trembling. "Please, please don't let them." James placed a protective hand on her head while keeping his eyes on both adults. The adoptive father had pushed himself up from the hood, blood trickling from his nose. His eyes burned with hatred. "Don't ever touch them again," James warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Either of you." The distant wail of sirens cut through the storm, growing louder with each passing second. Red and blue lights began to flash in the distance, reflecting off the wet pavement. Backup was finally arriving. The adoptive father spat on the ground, his face twisted with rage. "You have no right. Those papers are legal." "Legal papers bought with dirty money don't mean anything," James replied, pulling Lily closer to him. More patrol cars appeared through the rain, their tires splashing through puddles as they surrounded the scene. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, quickly taking control of the situation. James held Lily tightly against him as his fellow officers handcuffed the adoptive parents. Her small fingers clutched his uniform, and he could feel her tears soaking through the fabric. "You're safe now," he whispered, gently stroking her hair. "No one is taking you away." The flashing red and blue lights painted the wet street in an eerie glow as James held Lily close to his chest. More patrol cars pulled up, their sirens wailing through the stormy night. The adoptive parents stood handcuffed, their expensive clothes now soaked from the rain. The chief's car rolled up, its headlights cutting through the darkness. He stepped out, his face stern as he surveyed the scene. His eyes moved from James to the handcuffed couple, then to Lily trembling in James's arms. "What's the meaning of this, Carter?" the chief asked, his voice firm but not unkind. Before James could answer, a well-dressed man rushed forward, waving papers in the air. "I'm these people's lawyer," he announced, thrusting the documents toward the chief. "They have legal custody of this child. What Officer Carter is doing is kidnapping." James didn't budge. "Chief, this whole adoption was a scam. They bought these kids like property. Check the paperwork. It's all fake." "That's ridiculous," the adoptive mother shrieked, struggling against her handcuffs. "We have every right—" "Actually, you don't," came a new voice. Gabriel Reyes stepped into the light, holding a thick manila envelope. "Chief, I have evidence here showing exactly how this couple paid Miss Grant under the table for these children. Bank transfers, recorded conversations, it's all here." The chief took the envelope, his expression darkening as he examined its contents. He pulled out several documents, squinting at them in the dim light. Wire transfers, recorded phone calls. "This is absurd," the adoptive father shouted, but his face had gone pale. The chief looked up from the papers, his jaw set. "Get these two down to the station," he ordered. "We need to ask them some serious questions about these transactions." Two officers stepped forward, leading the protesting couple toward a waiting patrol car. The lawyer tried to intervene, but the chief cut him off with a raised hand. "Their car's being impounded as evidence," the chief announced. "We'll need to go through everything." Lily pressed her face deeper into James's chest as the adoptive parents were led away, their angry shouts fading into the night. Her tiny fingers clutched his uniform tightly. James looked down at her, gently stroking her hair. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "No one's taking you anywhere." The adoptive parents disappeared into the back of the patrol car, and James watched as they were driven away into the darkness, their fate sealed. The station buzzed with a quiet energy as James sat at his desk, shuffling through the mountain of paperwork before him. The overhead fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow, but somehow the office felt warmer than usual. In the corner, Lily and Lila played with some old stuffed animals they'd found in the lost and found box, their giggles echoing off the walls. James watched them from the corner of his eye, his heart swelling at the sight of their peaceful faces. For the first time in days, they looked like normal 5-year-old girls, not scared refugees running from a broken system. Lila was showing Lily how to make her teddy bear dance, and Lily's shy smile lit up her whole face. The door creaked open, and Gabriel Reyes walked in, his arms full of official-looking documents. His tie was loose, and dark circles hung under his eyes, but there was a determined set to his jaw. He dropped the stack on James's desk with a heavy thud. "The adoptive parents are being charged with fraud and kidnapping," Gabriel said, his voice low enough that the girls couldn't hear. "We found evidence of wire transfers and backdoor deals. It's ugly, James, really ugly." James nodded, running a hand over his tired face. But this is just the beginning," Gabriel warned, pulling up a chair. "We've got court hearings ahead. The adoption could still be overturned. The system, it's not going to make this easy for us." Lila's laugh rang out across the room, drawing both men's attention. She was now trying to teach Lily a clumsy version of pat cake, their small hands clapping together in an uneven rhythm. "Look at them, Gabriel," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "They're finally feeling safe. I won't let them go back into that system." Gabriel leaned forward, his expression serious. "I know, James, and we'll fight. But you need to be prepared. This isn't going to be quick or easy." James watched as Lily fumbled with the pat cake pattern, and Lila patiently showed her again. Their faces were relaxed, their movements free from the constant tension they'd carried for so long. They looked like they belonged here in this office under his protection. "Whatever it takes," James said firmly, straightening the papers on his desk. "I've already come this far. I'm not backing down now." The girls continued their game, their sweet laughter filling the room with a warmth that seemed to push back against the cold reality of their situation. James knew the road ahead would be difficult, but watching them play, seeing them finally act like the children they were meant to be, he felt his resolve strengthen. "We're going to make sure this works out," he promised them quietly, the weight of their future pressing heavily on his shoulders. James walked into the county courthouse, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Gabriel Reyes matched his stride, both men dressed in their best suits. The courthouse's high ceilings and wooden panels seemed to amplify the tension in the air. As they approached the courtroom, James caught sight of Judge Harrison, known throughout the county for his strict adherence to traditional family values and conservative rulings. The adoptive parents' lawyer, Mr. Peterson, stood in the corner with his arms crossed, his expensive suit and confident smirk suggesting he was ready for battle. James felt his stomach tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. Inside the courtroom, the proceedings began with Mr. Peterson's aggressive opening statement. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "Sheriff Carter has a documented history of anger management issues. We have evidence of an investigation into excessive force during an arrest 3 years ago." James clenched his jaw as Peterson produced a thick file, laying out the details of that old case. The judge peered over his glasses, his expression unreadable. Gabriel stood up next, his voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, we have concrete evidence that this adoption was processed illegally." He walked forward, presenting documents showing money transfers and backdoor dealings. These children were essentially stolen from their rightful family through fraudulent means. The judge listened, occasionally nodding, but his eyes kept drifting toward the adoptive parents. James felt his heart sink. The judge's body language suggested he was leaning their way. Then, in the heavy silence that followed, a small voice rang out. "He's our daddy," Lila said, her voice trembling but determined. She stood up from her seat, her tiny frame barely visible above the wooden barrier. He's the one who keeps us safe. The courtroom fell completely silent. Even the usual shuffling of papers ceased. Judge Harrison's stern expression softened as he looked at the twins, his eyes moving from Lila's determined face to Lily's quiet nod of agreement. Lila's words hung in the air like a prayer. James felt his heart pounding against his chest as he looked at the judge, knowing everything now rested in this man's hands. The simple truth in Lila's declaration, "He's our real daddy," echoed through the silent courtroom, carrying more weight than all the legal arguments combined. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as James sat beside Gabriel, his heart pounding against his chest. Judge Harrison's stern face revealed nothing as he studied the scene before him. Lily and Lila sat close to James, their small hands clasped together, their eyes darting between the judge and their would-be father. The adoptive parent's lawyer rose from his seat, straightening his expensive tie. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "Sheriff Carter may have good intentions, but he is simply not equipped to raise two young children. He works long, unpredictable hours. He has a documented history of anger management issues. And most importantly, he's single. These girls need a stable home with both a mother and father." The lawyer's words seemed to hang in the air as he continued. "These children have already experienced enough instability in their young lives. They deserve to be placed with a loving couple who can provide them with a normal family environment." Judge Harrison nodded thoughtfully, his weathered face showing no emotion. His eyes settled on James, and the question that followed made the room grow even quieter. "What happens when you die first, Sheriff Carter?" the judge asked, his voice grave. "What happens to these girls then?" James felt his breath catch in his throat. The question hit him like a physical blow, forcing him to confront the enormous responsibility he was asking to take on. He looked at the twins, seeing their innocent faces filled with trust and hope. Lily's quiet strength and Lila's fierce determination. They had already become his whole world. Taking a deep breath, James stood up, his voice thick with emotion but steady. "Then I'll make sure they never have to be alone again." The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Harrison's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, something softer crossing his features. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath, the weight of James's words settling over everyone present. James sank back into his chair, his hands trembling slightly. He felt a small hand slip into his, Lily's quiet gesture of support. Looking down at their joined hands, he squeezed gently, drawing strength from her touch just as much as she drew comfort from his. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Harrison cleared his throat. James could feel his heart hammering against his ribs as he sat between Lily and Lila, their tiny hands gripping his sleeves. The adoptive parents stood across the room, their faces tight with tension. The judge adjusted his glasses, his weathered hands moving through the stack of papers before him. The silence stretched on, becoming almost unbearable. James watched as the judge's eyes moved methodically across each document, each piece of evidence that could determine their future. After reviewing all the evidence presented, Judge Harrison began, his voice filling the hushed courtroom. "Including the documentation of fraudulent adoption processes and the testimony regarding the children's welfare, I have reached my decision." James felt Lily press closer to his side while Lila's grip on his arm tightened. The adoptive parent's lawyer shifted nervously, straightening his tie. After careful consideration, the judge continued, his tone firm and unwavering, "I am granting full custody to Sheriff James Carter." For a moment, James couldn't breathe. The words seemed to hang in the air before reality crashed over him like a wave. The courtroom erupted into a mixture of gasps and murmurs. The adoptive parents stood frozen, their faces draining of color. "Daddy?" Lila's voice trembled as she looked up at him, her eyes wide with hope and disbelief. James pulled both girls into his arms, holding them close as tears welled in his eyes. Lily buried her face in his chest while Lila wrapped her arms around his neck. Across the room, the adoptive parents began to protest, but their words were cut short as two officers approached with handcuffs. The evidence of their fraud was irrefutable, and now they would face the consequences of their actions. "Order in the court," Judge Harrison's voice boomed over the commotion. "The ruling is final. Sheriff Carter will assume immediate custody of Lily and Lila Carter. James held the girls tighter, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. "You're home now," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're finally home." The twins clung to him, their small bodies trembling with relief and joy. After all the fighting, all the uncertainty, they were finally, officially, a family. James steers his patrol car through the quiet streets of Mason's Hollow, his heart lighter than it's been in years. The gentle snowfall creates a peaceful atmosphere, each flake catching the glow of the streetlights. In the back seat, Lily and Lila chatter excitedly about their new home. "Will we have our own beds?" Lila asks, her voice filled with wonder. "And blankets?" Lily adds softly, her eyes wide with hope. James smiles, glancing at them in the rearview mirror. "You'll have everything you need, girls, I promise." The car turns onto his street, the familiar houses lined up like silent guardians in the night. His modest two-story home comes into view, and though it's dark, it seems to welcome them with open arms. "Here we are," James announces, pulling into the driveway. The engine quiets, and for a moment, they all sit there, taking in the significance of this moment. James helps the girls out of the car, their small boots crunching in the fresh snow. They follow him up the path to the front door, holding hands tightly as they always do. The key turns in the lock, and the door swings open to reveal their new home. The girls step inside cautiously, their eyes scanning every corner of the living room. The space isn't fancy, but it's clean and comfortable. A worn leather couch sits against one wall, and family photos line the shelves. "Can we look around?" Lila asks, bouncing on her toes with excitement. James nods, watching as they explore their new surroundings. Lily runs her hand along the soft fabric of the couch, while Lila peers into the kitchen with curiosity. After they've had their fill of exploring, James kneels down and opens his arms wide. "This is your home now, forever," he says, his voice warm and reassuring. The twins don't hesitate. They rush into his embrace, their tiny arms wrapping around his neck. James holds them close, feeling their trust and love wash over him. "Really forever?" Lily whispers against his shoulder. "Really forever," James confirms, his voice thick with emotion. Later, after showing them their new room with its twin beds and soft blankets, James helps them get ready for bed. He tucks them in carefully, making sure they're warm and comfortable. Lila yawns widely as he brushes her hair back from her forehead. "Good night, Daddy," she murmurs sleepily. Lily echoes her sister's words, her eyes already closing. James's heart swells at hearing them call him Daddy, a title he never thought he'd hear. He stands in the doorway, watching as their breathing becomes steady and deep. The twins look peaceful, finally safe in their new home. For the first time since his wife left, James feels complete. His family is whole, and he knows that everything he went through to get here was worth it. The morning sunlight streams through the kitchen windows, casting a warm glow across the breakfast table. Lily and Lila sit on their knees in their chairs, eagerly helping James prepare pancakes. Their matching pajamas are already dusted with flour, but their smiles shine brighter than the mess they're making. "Can I crack the egg?" Lila asks, bouncing in her seat. "I promise I won't get shells in it this time." James hands her an egg, watching carefully. "Remember, tap it gently against the bowl." Lily leans forward, her quiet voice full of concern. "Not too hard, Lila, like yesterday." Lila concentrates, her tongue sticking out slightly as she taps the egg against the bowl. This time it cracks perfectly, and she beams with pride as she separates the shell. "I did it, Daddy. Look." The word Daddy still makes James's heart skip a beat. It's been a week since the court made it official, but every time they call him that, it feels like a gift. "You're getting really good at that," James praises, ruffling her hair. "Soon you'll be making breakfast for me." Lily carefully measures flour into the bowl, her movements precise and thoughtful. "We made a new friend at school yesterday," she says softly. "Her name is Sarah, and she sits next to us at lunch." "She has pretty braids," Lila adds, "and she shared her cookies with us." James stirs the batter, watching his daughter's animated faces as they talk about school. Just days ago, They were terrified of going, clinging to his legs at drop-off. Now they chat about their teacher, their classmates, and the pictures they drew in art class. "And Mrs. Thompson said my reading is getting better," Lily says proudly, her usually quiet voice growing stronger. "She gave me a gold star." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," James responds, his chest swelling with pride. He pours the batter onto the griddle, making sure to add chocolate chips, their favorite. Lila stands up in her chair to watch the pancakes cook. "Can we have them shaped like hearts again?" "Of course," James says, already reaching for the special pancake mold he bought just for them. As he flips the pancakes, Lily looks up at him with her gentle brown eyes. "Daddy, I'm glad we're here," she says simply, her words filled with pure sincerity. James has to pause, swallowing hard against the sudden lump in his throat. He remembers finding them that cold night in the convenience store, how scared and broken they looked. Now, watching them flourish in their new home, seeing them grow more confident each day, he feels overwhelmed with gratitude. "Me too, baby," he manages to say, his voice thick with emotion. "Me too." The girls giggle as he serves up heart-shaped pancakes, their plates decorated with whipped cream and strawberries. The kitchen is warm with morning light and the smell of breakfast. But more than that, it's filled with love. The kind of love that transforms houses into homes and strangers into family. The December air is crisp outside, but inside James's house, warmth and joy fill every corner. Christmas lights twinkle from the windows, casting colorful shadows across the living room floor. The fresh pine scent of their newly bought Christmas tree mingles with the sweet aroma of baking cookies. "Daddy, can I put this one up high?" Lila stretches on her tiptoes, holding a glittering red ornament. James lifts her up, and she carefully places it on a branch, her face beaming with pride. Lily stands nearby, methodically sorting through the box of decorations. She picks up each ornament with careful consideration, treating them like precious treasures. Her quiet dedication makes James's heart swell. "Look what I've found." Lila pulls out a silver star from the bottom of the box. "Can we put it on top?" James helps both girls up, one at a time, to place the star together. The tree sparkles with lights and tinsel, each ornament placed with love and care. It's not perfect. Some branches are more crowded than others, and there's a noticeable empty patch near the bottom. But to James, it's the most beautiful Christmas tree he's ever seen. In the kitchen, cookie dough covers the counter as they work together to create festive shapes. Lila enthusiastically spreads frosting on her cookies, creating colorful masterpieces that are more abstract than traditional. Lily takes her time, carefully decorating each cookie with precise patterns. "I'm thankful for our new home," Lila announces suddenly, her hands covered in green frosting. "And for you being our daddy, and for cookies, and for Christmas." James watches as Lily nods in agreement, her small smile speaking volumes. She might not say much, but her contentment shows in the way she leans against him, in the peace that has settled into her eyes. Looking at his daughters, James feels overwhelmed by the love that fills his heart. Just months ago, his house was empty, his life lacking purpose. Now, watching these two precious girls decorate Christmas cookies, he realizes they've given him so much more than he could ever give them. "And I'm thankful for both of you," he says softly, pulling them close, not minding the frosting that gets on his shirt. As evening approaches, they gather in front of the fireplace. The Christmas tree lights dance across the walls, creating a magical atmosphere. Lily and Lila sit on the floor, their faces glowing with happiness and anticipation for the holiday ahead. James watches them, his heart full. This is what he's always wanted, not just to be a father, but to give these girls the love and security they deserve. This Christmas marks the beginning of their life together as a real family. The Christmas lights cast a warm glow throughout James's house as snowflakes dance outside the window. Lily and Lila sit cross-legged by the fireplace, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Their eyes sparkle with wonder as they watch the snow accumulate on the windowsill, creating a perfect winter wonderland. "Look, Daddy," Lila points excitedly. "The snow is making everything white and pretty." Lily nods in agreement, her quiet enthusiasm showing in her gentle smile. The aroma of freshly baked cookies wafts from the kitchen, where James is putting the finishing touches on their Christmas Eve dinner. In the kitchen, James carefully bastes the turkey, making sure everything is perfect. His hands move with purpose, determined to make this first Christmas together memorable. The timer dings, and he pulls out another batch of sugar cookies, their sweet scent filling the air. "Girls, want to help set the table?" James calls out, and both twins eagerly jump up from their spot by the fire. They work together, carefully arranging the napkins in neat triangles just like James showed them. Lila places the candles in the center of the table while Lily follows behind, making sure the silverware is straight. "Is this right, Daddy?" Lily asks softly, looking up at him with hopeful eyes. "Perfect, sweetheart," James responds, his heart swelling with pride. As they sit down to eat, the girls can barely contain their excitement about Christmas morning. Lila bounces in her seat, her fork clicking against her plate as she talks about Santa's imminent arrival. "We need to leave cookies and milk," she exclaims, "the special ones we made today." "And carrots for the reindeer," Lily adds thoughtfully, her voice quiet but sure. James watches them, overwhelmed by the pure joy radiating from their faces. Just months ago, these same girls were frightened and alone. Now they sit at his table, safe and loved, their eyes bright with childhood wonder. After dinner, James leads them upstairs for bedtime. The girls change into their matching Christmas pajamas, climbing into their beds with minimal protest. A Christmas miracle in itself. "Daddy," Lila whispers as he tucks her in. "Is tomorrow really going to be special?" James leans down, gently brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Tomorrow will be perfect," he promises, his voice thick with emotion. He moves to Lily's bed, tucking her in just as carefully. "Sleep tight, my angels," he whispers, his heart full of love. "Tomorrow is going to be perfect." As the girls drift off to sleep, James makes his way back downstairs. He settles into his chair by the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to the peaceful silence of his home. The snow continues to fall outside, creating a blanket of white that seems to insulate them from the rest of the world. He sits there, taking in the moment, overwhelmed by how much his life has changed. Finally, after years of loneliness, his house feels like a home. He has the family he always wanted, 2 precious daughters who fill his days with purpose and love. "Tomorrow everything begins," he whispers to himself, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire. The house is quiet in the pre-dawn darkness, save for the soft pitter-patter of tiny feet padding down the hallway. Lily and Lila can barely contain their excitement as they tiptoe down the stairs, their matching pajamas rustling with each step. The clock on the wall reads 5:30 a.m., but sleep is the furthest thing from their minds. "Come on, Lily," Lila whispers, tugging at her sister's hand. Their eyes grow wide as they reach the bottom of the stairs and see the soft glow of Christmas lights illuminating the living room. James sits in his favorite armchair near the tree, already dressed and waiting with a warm smile on his face. The girls freeze for a moment, worried they might be in trouble for being up so early, but his welcoming gesture sends them running toward the tree. "Daddy, look at all the presents!" Lila exclaims, dropping to her knees beside the carefully wrapped packages. Lily follows more slowly, her eyes scanning the colorful array of gifts with wonder. She's never seen so many presents meant just for them. James nods encouragingly, and the girls begin carefully selecting their first presents to open. The sound of tearing paper fills the room as the girls discover their treasures. Lily unwraps a soft, honey-colored teddy bear, its fuzzy fur perfect for cuddling. She hugs it close to her chest, a rare smile lighting up her entire face. "It's so soft," she whispers, running her fingers through the bear's fur. Lila squeals with delight as she reveals a beautiful doll with curly black hair just like hers. She cradles it gently, as if it's the most precious thing she's ever held. "She looks just like me." James watches them open gift after gift, new clothes, books, toys, and games. Each present brings fresh excitement and joy to their faces. His heart feels like it might burst as he watches them experience the magic of Christmas morning for the first time in their lives. Without warning, both girls abandon their presents and rush toward him, throwing their arms around his neck. "Thank you, Daddy," they cry in unison. their voices thick with happiness and gratitude. James wraps his strong arms around them both, pulling them close. He can feel their tiny hearts beating against his chest as he whispers, "You're the best Christmas gift I could ever have." The morning sun begins to peek through the windows, casting a golden glow across the room. James holds his daughters close, overwhelmed by the love and joy filling their home. For the first time in more years than he can count, he feels truly complete. "We're a family now," he whispers softly, watching the Christmas morning unfold around them. The Christmas decorations still twinkle in the corners of the living room, casting a warm glow across the peaceful scene. James sits on the well-worn couch, watching his daughters play with their new toys. Lily carefully arranges her teddy bear's bow tie, while Lila zooms around the room with her toy airplane, making enthusiastic engine noises. The fire crackles softly in the background, its warmth matching the feeling in James's heart. This house, once so empty and cold, now feels like the home he always dreamed of having. The girls' artwork adorns the refrigerator, and their small shoes line up neatly by the door. "Daddy, look!" Lila exclaims, demonstrating an elaborate flight pattern with her plane. Lily glances up from her bear, a small smile playing on her lips as she watches her sister's antics. James pulls them both close as they settle on the couch, one daughter tucked under each arm. He marvels at how quickly he's learned their individual personalities. Lila's boundless energy and determination, Lily's gentle thoughtfulness and quiet strength. They fit perfectly against him, their small bodies warm and trusting. As he holds them, his mind drifts back to the painful journey that brought them here. The years of loneliness after his marriage ended, the emptiness that seemed impossible to fill. He remembers the night he found them, cold and afraid in that convenience store, and how something inside him changed forever in that moment. The girls grow heavy against him as sleep begins to take hold. Lila's airplane drops from her loosening grip, and Lily's bear rests forgotten in her lap. Their breathing becomes deep and even, their faces peaceful in slumber. James feels a profound sense of rightness wash over him. This is what he was meant for, to be their father, to keep them safe, to give them the love they deserve. He gently brushes Lily's hair from her face and adjusts Lila's head to a more comfortable position. "You're safe now," he whispers softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Forever." Looking down at their sleeping faces, James feels the weight of the past lifting from his shoulders. The battles they fought to get here, the system they had to overcome. It all seems distant now. What matters is this moment, these precious girls who have become his whole world. They've found each other, and this is exactly where they belong. James takes a deep breath, his heart full of love for his daughters. He knows with absolute certainty that he'll never let them go. They're his family now, and they'll be together forever. The fire crackles softly in the hearth, its dying embers casting a gentle orange glow across the living room. James sits in his favorite armchair, with Lily and Lila nestled against him, their small bodies warm and content. He can hardly believe it's been a whole year since the intense custody battle that brought them together permanently. "Tell us again about the night you found us, Daddy," Lila whispers, her eyes bright with interest despite knowing the story by heart. James smiles, running his fingers through her hair. "Well, it was a cold winter night, just like this one." The peace of this moment stands in stark contrast to the turmoil they faced last year. The legal battles, the sleepless nights, the constant fear of losing the girls. It all seems like a distant dream now. James looks down at his daughters, marveling at how much they've grown and changed. Lily, still quiet but no longer afraid, reads her new book with careful concentration. The fear that once haunted her eyes has been replaced by a gentle confidence. She catches James watching her and offers a small, knowing smile, the kind that makes his heart swell with pride. Lila, ever the energetic one, can't sit still even now. She bounces slightly as she plays with her doll, weaving elaborate stories about princesses and brave knights. Her voice, once hesitant and defensive, now fills the house with joy and laughter. "Daddy?" Lily looks up from her book. "Are you happy?" The question catches James off guard, but he doesn't hesitate. "Happier than I've ever been, sweetheart." The girls snuggle closer and James wraps his arms around them both. He thinks about all the changes in their lives, the new routines, the school plays, the birthday parties, the quiet moments like this one. Every day brings new challenges, but he wouldn't have it any other way. "Remember when we first came home?" Lila asks, her voice soft with memory. "Everything seemed so big and scary." "But not anymore," Lily adds quietly. James holds them tighter, feeling the steady rhythm of their breathing. He's never been more certain of anything in his life. This is exactly where he's meant to be. The future may be uncertain, but his love for these girls is absolute. The fire pops and settles lower in the grate, casting dancing shadows on the walls. James watches the flames, remembering the long journey that brought them here. The cold nights of patrol, the desperate chase to save Lily, the tense courtroom battles, it all led to this moment of perfect peace. As the fire flickers one final time, James looks down at his daughters. Lily has dozed off, her book forgotten in her lap. Lila fights sleep, her eyes heavy but determined to stay awake. His heart swells with love and gratitude. They're safe now. They're his. And this time, he's never letting go. If you enjoyed the story of Lily, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it. They're his. And this time, he's never letting go. If you enjoyed the story of Lily, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.